All right, so before I die, I want to just fill it out. Like I said, you can leave it in your seat. You can give it to me after church, just as long as I get it. That way we know what we're working with. So, all right, so how many of you guys grew up playing with Lincoln Logs? Okay, a few. Lincoln Logs were awesome, right? They were like the greatest things ever. Now, we didn't have Lincoln Logs in my house. We were, my mom would say frugal, we would say cheap. But my Mamaw Fulton had Lincoln Logs. So every time we would go to her house, she had like the actual Lincoln Logs. Every time we would go to her house, I always spend a good amount of time playing with the Lincoln Logs. For those of you who don't know, Lincoln Logs are basically like building logs. They're like Legos, but more challenging. They don't lock together. They got little grooves. They got a stack. You can build, buildings, houses, storefronts, whatever you wanted to do. They even had like, trusses for the roof and all sorts of great stuff and doors. It was awesome. It was so cool to build with that. And I actually have some Lincoln Logs right here with us today, which it's the 100th anniversary of Lincoln Logs. So what I'm going to do is I've got two volunteers that are going to come up here, JT and Kylie. Y'all come on up. Hustle now. And this is what you're going to do. You have an assignment for this time, okay? Each of you has 111 pieces. 111. You think with being 100th anniversary, they give you 100 pieces? But you got 111 pieces and about 20 minutes to build a house. Can you do that? Look, it's right here. Look, this is what you're doing right here. There's your stuff. Kylie, you be over here. Jason, you over there. There you go. You don't need instructions, do you? You don't do it. That's cheating, right? Can you do this? You gonna make it? You be all right? All right. So for the next 20 minutes, look, just as long as you're done by the time I get done. That's your only rule. And build a good house. Now, you dump them out, do whatever you want to do. All right? I'm not very confident in you two right now. Have you ever played with Lincoln Logs before? Have you ever heard of a Lincoln Log? Yeah. Okay. You better not build it that wide. Don't build it that wide, I promise. Yep. You're about to make a big mistake. All right. Anyway, so over the next 20 minutes, these guys are going to build a house. They're going to build a house, and don't worry, there's no prizes. So, it's not a competition, so it's all good. So you got 20 minutes, just be done by the time I get done, all right? Or you're going to ruin this whole thing. Have you ever built Lincoln Logs? Look, they lock together. Look. Okay, good. All right. He's never built it. All right. Anyway, today we finish up our series entitled The Greatest Sermon. Over the summer, we've been looking at Jesus' Sermon on the Mount and going through all of the teaching that's found in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. It's been a great time looking at this and looking at all the pieces and looking at everything that Jesus has talked about. We've covered the Beatitudes, Jesus fulfilling the law. We've talked about anger, lust, divorce, retaliation, loving our enemies, giving, praying, fasting, treasures, judging others, seeking God, and how we treat others, and then the fruit of following Jesus. We have covered a lot of ground this summer, and we have picked up so much information and knowledge from Jesus. So much of who we are as Christians, so much of the foundation that we have as a church and as a religion come from these three chapters, come from what Jesus spoke of. Jesus was teaching his disciples, all those that were listening, and he was telling them what God expected from us in this life. Last week, Earl ended with a powerful paragraph in the sermon, and that's where we kind of need to start. We kind of need to overlap a little bit. This is what Jesus said in Matthew 7, 21 through 23. He says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do mighty works in your name?' And then I will declare to them, 'I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness.'" So not all people who call upon Jesus, who come to Jesus, will be saved. But Jesus says only the ones that come and do the will of the Father who is in heaven. That's tough teaching that we don't really like to hear as humans. We just want to, use the magic word, say the magic phrase, and everything's good, and we're saved and everything is good. It's tough teaching that goes against everything that the world teaches us, and a lot of churches teach us too. Yes, God's love and God's grace are sufficient to save even the worst of human beings. But we have to do the will of God. Jesus says just calling on him is not enough, that we have to be in the will of the Father. This passage is crazy to me when you think about it, though, because these people come to Jesus and they're like, look, we were prophesying in your name. We were doing all these great things. We were doing these wonderful miracles. We were casting out demons. And we come to you and you say, wait a minute, I didn't even know you, because they weren't doing the will of the Father. Isn't that crazy? So Jesus follows up that passage and he wraps up the entire Sermon on the Mount by saying these words. This is verse 24 through 27. He says, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and they beat on that house, and it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against the home, and it fell. And great was the fall of it. So Jesus says anyone who hears these words and does them will be like a wise man. Yet anyone who hears these words and does not do them will be like a foolish man. See, what we need to understand, it's the action that comes after the hearing that matters. It's the action that comes after the hearing that matters. Not every single person who was on that mountainside that day when Jesus gave this great sermon is now in heaven. Not every single person who heard that would be in heaven. Imagine they're walking home from hearing Jesus preach this long sermon. They're walking home, they're talking to their wife, and they say, man, Jesus sure was long-winded today. He went so long that even the Baptists are going to meet us at the subway. You know? That Jesus guy sure does have some strange ideas about how to do things. I'm not really sure about that. You see, just because they were there and just because they heard Jesus' words doesn't mean a hill of beans. You know, on the other side, the other attitude could be, that was an amazing sermon. I want to live my life like Jesus told us to. That Jesus guy is awesome. I believe that he is who he says he is. That Jesus guy is pretty special. I'm going to do my best to follow him in everything that I do. You see, just the fact of hearing a sermon preached, even Jesus preaching, doesn't matter one tiny bit. The fact that they were there means nothing unless it had a fundamental impact on their lives and changed the way they live their lives. You see, we're not going to go to heaven one day. We're not going to go to heaven one day and say, hey, you're a pretty good follower of Christ, huh? You must be. Since you're here, and you say, nope. I was at the Sermon on the Mount. I didn't do anything he said, but I was there, so therefore I got in. That's not going to be like that, because that's not how it works. Jesus says that only the ones who do the will of the Father, and only those that hear what he's saying and actually do, that actually does what he says, will enter the kingdom of heaven. You see, that correlation between the people listening to the Sermon on the Mount that day and doing what Jesus told them is a pretty easy correlation for us to make into our daily lives here and now. Just because you were here this morning listening to a sermon doesn't matter a hill of beans. When we get to heaven, we're not going to say, well, you must be a great follower of Jesus if you're here. You say, well, no, but I went to church 50 weeks a year my entire life. Didn't listen, didn't make any changes to my life. The other 6 days, I was a terrible person, but I was there those 6 days. No, that's not how it's going to work. That's not how it's going to work. There's not a magical percentage that if you hit that percentage of your church attendance, you'll automatically get to go to heaven. Jesus says that only the ones that do the will of the Father, only the ones that hear the teaching of Jesus and do that teaching will enter into the kingdom of heaven. Now, coming to church is super important. Getting involved and serving together and being a part of community helps build us up and helps us stay on the right path. But it alone will not get you to heaven. So Jesus says that the one that hears what he has to say and does what he says is like a man who builds his house on a rock. And the house that's built on the rock can withstand the rains and withstand the winds and withstand the floods of this life. This is such a great analogy for us. This is an analogy that we understand. If you build a house, you're going to build it onto a foundation. You're not just going to start building the house on dirt. You're going to pour the footer and pour a basement and make sure that everything's on the right. Everything's right. And this analogy would have been perfect for the people of the first century in Jerusalem. Think about where in the world Judea is. It's basically a big desert. It's a big sandbox where they are. But if you dig down deep enough, you'll find limestone. Jerusalem actually sits on limestone deposits that are super famous. In fact, the rock is called Jerusalem limestone. And that area was famous for their stone. They were famous for the solid rock that was laying beneath them. But in order to get that stone, you had to dig down and find it. So when Jesus said that the wise man built on the rock and the foolish man built on the sand, they'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense, of course. Yeah. If you're wise, you dig down and you get to the rock. But why would anyone build their house on the sand instead of the rock? Why would anyone say, no, this is good, I'm just going to build here. It's solid enough. Why would anyone not want their house sitting on this famous, solid Jerusalem limestone? Basically comes down to 3 reasons. These people wanted to build their house on the rock because they were lazy. They were lazy. They were too lazy to go down that far. They didn't want to build on the rock because they would have to dig all the way down to it. Another reason why they wouldn't want to build on the rock, or they didn't build on the rock, is because they were too cheap. They were too cheap. They didn't want to have to pay for it to be excavated and to get down and have somebody dig it out. But then the third reason that they wouldn't build on the rock is because they were too ignorant. Either they didn't know the rock was down there, or they didn't know that it was a serious enough thing. So if a foolish man built on the sand, he was either lazy, cheap, or ignorant. So on the flip side, if a man did in fact dig down to the house, to put his house on this solid limestone, he was not lazy and not cheap, and certainly not ignorant. So this analogy that Jesus gives us for listening to him and doing what he says and building on the foundation of the rock, it's basically you want to go into a solid foundation or a sinking foundation. And this is a perfect analogy for us to understand here. We get it. There's not much more that anyone could say about this. Yes, it's either build on a solid rock or build on a sinking foundation. But we need to understand is that the same 3 reasons that a person would not build their house on a solid rock is the same reason that we as Christians don't build our house on the solid foundation of God. Either we are lazy, we are cheap, or we are ignorant. When it comes to our faith, we get really, really lazy sometimes, don't we? We get really lazy when it comes to our faith. We don't want to do the work. We get lazy when it comes to reading our Bibles and studying the Word of God. We get lazy when it comes to our prayer life and spending time one-on-one time with the Creator of the universe. We're lazy when it comes down to loving others and showing God's love to those people. We're lazy when it comes to serving others. We're lazy when it comes to being at church on a regular basis. We're lazy when it comes to seeking after God and chasing after Him with everything that we have. We get lazy. We get lazy in our faith, and as a result, instead of building our faith on the solid foundation of God, we put it in the sinking sand of our own self. We get lazy. Another reason we fail to build on Christ's solid foundation is that we are cheap. And no, I'm not talking about money. I'm not talking about your giving. That may be a small part of it, but that's not it. We are cheap because we count the cost and we decide that it's too much. We sit down and we add up what it would cost us to follow Christ, and we decide that's too much. It's too much. We're too cheap to share our faith with others because it might cost us the relationship. We are too cheap to follow God's call into ministry because it may cost too much of our lives. We are too cheap to freely and boldly further the kingdom of God because it might cost us too much. It might cost us the money that we've earned. We're too cheap to go to a third world country and spread the gospel because that might cost us our own comfort. You see, we don't follow Jesus because we're cheap and the cost is too high. And finally, the reason we don't follow Jesus is because we are ignorant. We are ignorant to what Jesus has told us. We are ignorant to what the Holy Spirit is calling us to do and currently telling us. You see, every piece of instruction that we would ever need for our lives is found in the Bible, yet we don't read it. We never open it. We treat our Bibles like a decoration in our homes instead of what we need every single day. We don't read it to our children. We don't study it ourselves. We don't know. We don't memorize. Therefore, we are ignorant of what Jesus wants because we don't know what His Word says. So just like that person that builds their house on the sand instead of the rock, we're foolish. And just like that person who is building a house, we ourselves are responsible for where our foundation is. There's nothing that I can say to you here today that can get through to you and make you do that. You were the only one. So when it comes to listening to and doing what Jesus says, oftentimes we are lazy, cheap, or ignorant. And when any of those three happen, we are like the foolish man who builds their house on the sand, and that house is destroyed as soon as life gets rough. So as Christians, we have to constantly be fighting our natural and sinful selves. And we have to push ourselves so we aren't lazy and we aren't cheap and we aren't ignorant. We must fight every single day to not only know what Jesus said, but to do what Jesus said. We must count the cost of following Jesus every single day and decide that no matter what the cost is, we are going to live out for Him. And we must constantly be learning and deepening our knowledge and wisdom of God. You see, this life is all about seeking after God and striving to live for His will. You see, that was the final part, the final point of Jesus' sermon, where He turned and He put everything back together and brought everything together. And then verses 28 29 it says, "And when Jesus finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at His teaching, for He was teaching them as one who had authority and not as their scribes." So the crowds were astonished at the authority of Jesus. Jesus had the authority to teach them. And when we look back at the Sermon on the Mount as a whole, it was a groundbreaking, revolutionary sermon. Everything that Jesus said through this sermon was completely revolutionary. Jesus taught on anger, lust, divorce, taking oaths, giving, prayer, being anxious. Everything that He said is completely countercultural. If someone were to take these 3 chapters of Matthew, the entire book, or the entire Sermon on the Mount, and lived these out to a perfect T, they would stick out like a sore thumb. They would stick out like a sore thumb in our culture. And you know what? As Christians, we should stick out like a sore thumb in our culture. We should be different. The way we live our lives should be different. We should be so countercultural and so different from the world that people would look and say, what's going on with you? I just cut you off in traffic and you waved and smiled. What's going on with you? A pretty girl in a short skirt just walked by and you looked the other way. What's going on with you? That person was so mean and angry and hateful to you, and instead all you did was be nice back to them. What's different about you? You give to other people who need it, even though you earn that money yourself. Why are you so different? You never judge others, but you love them the way they are. And you love them the way that you want to be loved. See, can't you see that everything that Jesus said in this sermon is completely opposite to the way we would naturally act? Completely opposite to the way that the world tells you to act. And that is the point. That is everything. That is the entire point of what Jesus is talking about throughout this entire sermon. That's why Jesus taught after everything He said to them. After everything that He told them, He said, this is the solid ground that is the foundation of where you need to build your life. He says, if you listen to everything that I've taught you and you do everything that I've taught you, then you're going to be just fine. But if you've heard everything that I just said, and you don't apply this to your life at all, then you're going to be just like a foolish man. You see this final analogy that Jesus uses of building a house on solid rock or building a house on sinking sand. It leaves us with a decision. It leaves us with a decision in our lives. Is our life going to be on the rock? Or is our life going to be on the sand? It's one way or the other. It's one way or the other. Do we want to build our life on the sinking sand of this world, or on the sinking sand of our own selves, on the sinking sand of our own pride, or the sinking sand of our careers, of our culture, of our friends, of our family? Do we want to build our life and make everything that we have about that on the sinking sand? Or do we want to come to this side and we say, this is the solid rock of God, nothing else really matters. I'm going to build my life upon Jesus' words, upon His teaching, upon what He has called us to. I'm going to build my life on His love. I'm going to build my life on His grace. And that solid foundation. You guys done? What you know, trees? Seriously?
I made trees and landscaping. And grass.
He landscaped it. I gotta take a picture of it. Hang on.
Was that not supposed to do?
Dude, it looks great, man. That is a fantastic home. Alright. JT, yours is about as plain can be. That's alright, dude. I like it. Hey. You made yours like a picture on bucket, didn't you? Alright, y'all give him a round of applause. Hey, good job, dude. Thanks. Appreciate it. Y'all go smart. Jeez. So this final analogy that Jesus uses is a perfect analogy. Where is your life? Where are you going to build your life? You know, these boys did a fantastic job, and we've got 2 really good constructed homes up here. You're going to build your life somewhere. You're going to build no matter what. Your life is going to be built no matter what. So what you're going to do is your life, if it's built on a solid foundation, your life will stand here. And no matter if the winds blow or the floods come or the roof will fall a bit. We're like the logs. Come on. Everything will be fine. Your foundation is solid. Everything's fine. Everything is good. And no matter what happens in your life, you'll be fine. But if you build your house, no matter how great it is and how beautifully landscaped it is, if it's on a wobbly foundation, it doesn't matter how awesome your house is. It doesn't matter how great your life is. If you're on a weak and flimsy foundation, then it doesn't matter. You see, there is only one place. There is only one place where we can build our lives. There's only one person where we can build our lives. And that's on the solid rock of Jesus Christ. So the question begs, what foundation is your life built on right now? If you can stop and you can reflect and look deep into your heart, to look into a spiritual mirror and be honest with yourself, completely honest with yourself, where is the foundation of your life? What is your life built on? Is your life built on this world? Is your life built on yourself, on your pride, on your career, on your family, on your status, on how awesome you are? Where is your life built? It's the most important question you'll ever answer. Is your life built on the sinking sand that's going to erode the second this life starts throwing wind at you? Is your house going to be destroyed the second the winds pick up and the rains come and the floods come? Because here's the deal. This life is a brutal time. It's a brutal place. This life will chew you up and spit you out. And if your life is built on all of those things, built on that sinking sand, you're not going to make it. You're not going to make it. But if you build your life on Jesus, and you build your life on His love and His grace, and build your life on His Word, then there is nothing that this world can throw at you that you can't stand. You could go through the worst of valleys, the worst thing you could possibly imagine, and if your life is built on a solid rock, then nothing's going to happen. Because you were built on that firm foundation. So we're going to end with a song of invitation and a song of worship. If you're here and you know your life is built on that sinking sand, Today's a good time to stop and say, no, I need to switch that up, and I need to build my life on Christ. And if you're here and you have never given your life to Jesus, and you've never even thought about the foundation of your life, this is just something completely new, this is a good time to come and talk to somebody. So I'm going to pray, and we're going to sing. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for your love and for your grace. We are so thankful that we have the opportunity to build our lives on you. Because God, this life is so hard and this life is so difficult that we could never do it by ourselves. And there's no way that we could ever build a home good enough without you. So God, please forgive us for the times where we have built our house upon that sinking sand and beating our chest saying, look how great I am, look how awesome this is. And as soon as the winds come, it knocks it right down. And God, please be with us and let us build our house on you, on your love and on your grace. And it's in your Son's name we pray. Amen.